Hello and welcome to this latest Levelling Up Goals seminar, which is on the Levelling Up Goal 9, Extending Enterprise. I'm Ian Dale. Let me introduce you to our panel today. And they are, of course, Justine Greening, who needs very little introduction, but she was Secretary of State for Education, International Development and Transport. Theo Paphitis is a retail entrepreneur and TV dragon, chairman and owner of Ryman, Robert Dias, Boo Avenue and London Graphic Centre. Paul Marchbank is Dean of the Faculty of Business, Law and Digital Technologies at Solent University. Caroline Walsh is Director of the Solent Business School, and Saki Bhatti is Conservative MP for Meriden. Justine, why don't we start with you? If you can just outline what the 9th Levelling Up Goal is, and that can inform the rest of our discussion.
So the Levelling Up Goals is a framework where we've really broken down what levelling up means into 14 key goals that we need to achieve. And the 9th one, as you said, Ian, is about extending enterprise. It's the fact that although many people will work in a company, actually creating business and creating new opportunities through setting up companies is a key part of how we're going to level up. And recognizing also the fact that not everyone knows how to do that. I certainly didn't when I was a young person growing up. It'd be interesting to hear from Saqib and Theo, because of course they're both people who've done just that for themselves and been entrepreneurs and are entrepreneurs. So I think there are 3 key issues for extending enterprise. One is that it matters for places. And we often talk about inward investment in regeneration, but actually we shouldn't forget that starting up companies in those places themselves from people who live there is a key way we can get more opportunity. The second is, I think young people are changing in their attitudes of what they want to do. They're not necessarily looking at a career in a company as being what they do with their lives. They're looking at a portfolio of opportunities. But one of those is often doing their own thing, starting their own company. So it's never been a better time to talk about how extending enterprise can genuinely level up. I think the third aspect for me that's really interesting from this seminar and this group of people is the role that universities play in that. And we often think about maybe business schools doing it, and it'll be great to hear from Solent about that. But actually, there's a more general push across a university like Solent around entrepreneurship, not just in terms of its own students and helping them understand how they can start, set up, and then succeed with running their own business. But also, interestingly, the work that Solent would do with other businesses and SMEs in its region to support them to grow. So existing companies also doing better, and they're a key part of that economy that Solent is supplying talent into. So I just think it's something in Whitehall that often gets missed, is the role that universities play in extending enterprise. So yeah, it should be a really great discussion today. And I think we've almost got the perfect panel of people to help us navigate our way through it.
Theo, let's start with you, because when you and I were a lad, enterprise, I'm not sure that word was even really used in the modern day lexicon. It certainly wasn't used in schools very much. How do you feel our whole attitude to enterprise has changed over the last few decades? And how much of the changes are down to the programs like the ones that you've made over the years?
Ian, you're absolutely right. When I was at school, the thought of the word entrepreneur was not a word that was even bandied around. I didn't even know it existed. And it was just about a structured career path, either education or an apprenticeship, or you're going to go and work for somebody. The thought of starting your own business was never talked about, never mind encouraged, because it wasn't part of the curriculum. When we talk about programs like Dragon's Den, The Apprentice, really that's what's lifted the shroud and the mystique about running your own business. And business isn't that complicated. And that's the point that whenever I speak to young people in education, I keep saying to them, it's common sense. It's just a continuation of what you've been doing. If you don't do your homework in business, you'll have the same result as if you don't do your homework at school. You will fail. The rest of it is absolutely common sense. But when you look at the statistics, where 50% of all startups fail in the first 2 years, and then you look at the level of contribution from SMEs to UK PLC's economy, which is again around another 50%. Imagine if we manage to get that education right. So, by the way, people do go on, and even when they've failed once, they'll go on to be successful later on in another business. But if we can educate first time round, the effect to our economy would be amazing.
There's several points that you've raised there, which we'll come on to a little bit later. I just wanted to do a quick whiz around everybody else as well. Saqib, I think looking at your CV, I mean, you've got business running through your veins, both in the company that you started up. You've got a doctorate at Solent University in business administration, all sorts of other things. Why has business obsessed you? And then maybe also answer the question as to why there are so few people with real business experience in Parliament.
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me onto this esteemed panel. It's a great privilege to be here. Look, I mean, actually, in my business, it was my father who started it. It was a chartered accountancy practice, and I was very, very lucky to have come into that business, having had a professional background in a big four firm. But in my training days, I was working with big banks and auditing them during the financial crisis. And then I remember moving over on the 1st of January 2011 to the accountancy firm, where we were dealing with entrepreneurs, family businesses, and where, you know, I'd be looking in the audits, I'd be looking at materiality levels of 100 million, so nothing would matter underneath that because it was so trivial to the size of the balance sheet. All of a sudden, I was looking for the last £10, and it really helped me. First of all, it made me a better parliamentarian, I think. You know, whether other people agree with that or not, I'm sure time will tell. But I think for me, it meant that I understood over time what were the driving factors in the psyche of entrepreneurs in terms of setting up a business. What were the thought processes that would, if for example, you increased the tax, what would be the thought process of how people would have to make those judgments in terms of R&D, investment, or even just going about the business of starting up a business. And I was lucky to be a director on the local enterprise partnership, where I was responsible for business support, where we had, during my tenure, 5 years of the largest amount of startups outside of London setting up, which it was a great privilege to be doing that portfolio. But I also understood actually, and I say this as a Conservative politician, about the role of the state and how actually it is for entrepreneurs to decide where they want to set up business, what are the kind of the key ingredients. And there's no one formula, but of course, as Theo has talked about, education, skills, having the right investment, and also having the kind of the ecosystem that would be there. And I found, as I now find in Parliament, actually my constant battle at the LEP is just saying, hang on, let's take a step back and let's not tell business what they need. Let's not assume what they want. Let them decide for themselves and create the environment for them to succeed and thrive.
Caroline Walsh, let's come to you. You are director of the Solent Business School. When you get students at the age of 18, what are their motivations to come and study business? Is it because some of them maybe have already started businesses? Because of course the internet allows that now in a way that it wouldn't have done 15 or 20 years ago. Is it because they want to move into business in their later career? Is it because they've been inspired to do it at school? Because I suspect too few schools actually run business courses.
Yeah, actually, the motivations for our students are varied, especially those coming into business. They definitely are passionate about success. They want to succeed. That may be in their own business, and some of them do have business ideas. We have people actually of all ages joining us as well. So sometimes we have people who have actually tried out working in a more classical sort of company environment or a public sector environment, and now they've discovered they want to set up their own business and do something else, so they come back to learn with us. But a lot of our students, yeah, they're motivated by success. They have aspirations. They don't always know exactly where those want to go. I mean, if you want to be a vet, you know you want to be a vet, and that's what you're going to study. Or if you're passionate about sort of being an engineer. But if you're interested in a variety of things, but you're not absolutely sure what you want to do. The business degree is often where people come. They want to succeed. They want to learn the skills to do well wherever they decide to go as they learn through that journey. But quite a lot of our students, I mean, we're sort of third in the UK graduate business startups. So clearly, Solent as a university, and that isn't all from the business school, by the way, that's across the university. There is an entrepreneurial leaning, and it's part of our DNA, really, that we support and encourage that ambition, really.
And Paul Marchbank, is that something that you think is now we're seeing over the whole of the university system, or is it still comparatively few universities who really put their all into business courses?
I think it's increasing, actually. I think education is changing to a certain degree from very, very specific information only about a core subject, but into addressing core skills. Problem solving is a great example of that. Entrepreneurship and enterprise are abilities which people can learn and gather and learn by other people's mistakes, as Theo has said, then apply them in a real world. And that's very much something that Solent has always done. It's been this university for applied education and research. And key to that application is taking it out into the real world and creating and controlling your future. For young people who may have not gone to a university possibly 30, 40 years ago, can actually control that destiny and change their lives. And that's key, I think, to the changing landscape of education and also the levelling up agenda.
Let's stick with the whole education subject for a minute, because I think it is actually core to everything. And if you look at all of the seminars that we've done over the last year or two, whatever subject it is, education has been at the core of it. And Theo, do you get frustrated when you find that you're taking on people in your various businesses and they don't come to you readily equipped for the world of business? If Justine was still education secretary, give me two things that you would say to her, right, this is what you need to do over the next few years?
Wow, if I could do that, Ian, that'd be amazing.
Too late, unfortunately.
But the thing is, I was an accidental entrepreneur. I was dyslexic, so I had to leave school at 16. There was no pathway for me for further education. It was leave, get a job. I had no qualification. I got a Scottish certificate in colouring in maps, geography, and that was the level of my academic qualifications. So being an entrepreneur for me was, I just had to, because that was the only thing I could actually do. It was forced upon me. When we talk about the part that education can play in that, I think it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And more universities, I can see that from the network that I belong to. And I run a small business network, SBS, Small Business Sunday, which got something like 3,000 small businesses in it now. And we started it about 11 years ago. And more of those members now are beginning to realize the importance of getting some knowledge before you go out like I did in the world and learn by falling flat on your face a couple of times before you actually learn to do it properly. And actually, the fact that now it is a recognized career path. And for all, you can definitely credit some of the TV programs that we spoke about earlier as being the pathfinders on this. But now I speak to kids, my mailbag, and certainly the other dragons, past and present, when I talk to them, the majority of their mailbags are from youngsters in full-time education. So that appetite is definitely there. And what we have to do is not just encourage, but lay the foundations of the core foundations, the skills that you will need to be successful. The rest of it, of course, things like passion, which thing I always talk about in business, when kids say to me, which sector do you think I should go into? My answer always is, get the skill sets and then follow your passion, because that's when you're really going to score.
But how can you provoke the passion? Because not everyone will automatically think to themselves, "Oh, I'd like to be an entrepreneur." Now, I think maybe I don't know whether we would all agree on this, that there are natural born entrepreneurs, people whose are just, it's just what they were born to do. Other people can learn. Well, I think they can learn it.
Believe you me, Ian.
But,
believe you me, I have invested in some of the most unlikely entrepreneurs you could possibly imagine.
give me an example.
Ian Westwood and his wife Sarah, they pitched. It was a Dragon's Den investment. They were from training in the National Health Service. They did training, and they were most unlikely entrepreneurs. And they pitched a piece of statically charged cling film that you can fold. They solved the need as they were going out around the country training. They needed a flip chart, but they managed to find this statically charged piece of cling film that folds up. You put it in your bag, and then you just put it on the wall and just write on it with magic markers and then wipe it. I mean, they didn't invent it; they just found it. I thought, what, this solves a need for mobile trainers. They've made an incredible success, a multi-million-pound business. And when they pitched at the time, I remember the tall fella, my very good friend Peter Jones, within 30 seconds discounted them, got up and wrote on this cling film, I am out. didn't give them a second chance. But they weren't natural entrepreneurs, but they done their homework, they taught themselves, they found a product accidentally, and they created a multi-million-pound business. So, and I've invested in many people who, I sometimes compare it to football, because I love football. So you've got Premier League players, and your Football League players in the Championship, Division 1, League 1, League 2. We can all do it. We don't all have to do it at the same level, but we can all do it and have success and enjoy doing it.
But Caroline, when you first meet your new intake of students, can you identify the ones that you think are natural born entrepreneurs and the ones where you think, right, we've got to tease this out of them? Or is that not part of what you think your role is?
It's when we first kind of meet with the students, in the first couple of days of what they do, they work together and have to do a bit of a pitch with usually one of our business partners. So we do partner a lot with different size businesses, from small, medium enterprises and entrepreneurial businesses right through to very large companies. And I think you start to see the people that are very good at sort of, putting themselves forward, that you can see straight away. People who are very confident working and presenting, they may be very good entrepreneurs, but equally they may be very good in other ways as well. So you can't always tell, but what we do make sure they know about is the different, as Saqib was saying about the ecosystem within the university to support them. Our entrepreneur in residence, our Solent Futures Careers Hub, Solent Productions and Solent Creatives, where they can actually freelance and practice. So we make sure they understand the ecosystem that's available to them, because the university experience is sort of multi-layered, and to get the best value out of it, you want to do all your courses and get all the great insights. As Theo says, you want to be able to learn from other people's lessons, mistakes and findings, the best, learn from the best and sort of be able to stand on their shoulders. And as Paul says, that's from across the across the range of businesses and universities. We're sort of providing that insight and those innovations, but then to provide the access to practice, having a go on live briefs and on real business situations and simulations. It's kind of a safe environment to have a go and then test yourself. Is this what I want? A lot of people don't realize they want it until later on. So it's not necessarily in the first year that you think, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Some people do. But sometimes it's later on, by the third year, people are starting to think, oh yeah, actually I can do this and I'm going to. You said
excuse me, you said earlier on that many of your students are not 18 years old. Are you finding that the proportion of your more mature students on your course is higher than other courses at the university?
I don't know that it's higher. Certainly, we have on our apprenticeships that that tends to have a wider range of ages, I would say, on the apprenticeship degrees that we run. And that's, you know, probably understandable because people are in work and also learning. So that's kind of a good way to do that. But no, I think actually across Solent University, we encourage people to come in at all different ages and stages. So, you know, from engineering and nursing through to, you know, the creative arts and graphic design and computing, to business. So there is a mix, but that said, there are always those very passionate people of all ages who know straight away that they want to get into being an entrepreneur and running their own thing. But equally, there are people that enjoy the idea of being an entrepreneur as well, which is something that all businesses also value, you know, the entrepreneurial skills inside the business, really.
Paul, we are talking about levelling up goals. So have you done any studies into the social makeup of the students that come to Solent University to study business? Because I think if like Saqib, his family had a background in business, so people then, it's a natural thing for them to do. But if I think of where I live in North Norfolk, if there's an 18-year-old who lives in Munsley on the North Norfolk coast, has had no background in business at all, how do you engender someone like that to want to study business?
Yeah, one of the reasons that first attracted me to Solent University many years ago was its commitment to providing participation agenda, and it would take students from all sorts of backgrounds, but it was very much transformative. And as a person myself who left school at 16 and didn't, a bit like Theo, actually didn't have the same opportunities, it really resonated with me that they would give students a real opportunity to change their lives. So it's not just on A-level grades or BTEC grades. It's about aptitude and passion, exactly as Theo was saying there. You know, to turn your hobby into your occupation, to follow your dreams and aspirations. So taking students into Solent, often they may not see immediately what they want to do exactly, and that's great. You know, we don't want a 17-year-old who already knows what they want to do down the line. So quite often it really is very much about very generic areas of interest. So it could be media or business or law. And then once they arrive with us, we then spend a lot of time, an awful lot of time with those students and nurturing them, and then taking them in a direction. So like many courses, the first year is quite generic, where they have a taster from this buffet. So they'll do a bit of everything. And then from that, we'll start to specialize as the course goes on. And as I said earlier, the key isn't just about absolute key sort of knowledge about a specific area, but it's about, to use that phrase, you know, teach a person how to fish, how to be a freelancer, how to see themselves as a business, that they are the most important commodity possibly, and how they can shape that and fashion it for the future, which is why, as Caroline said, why we're third for business startups. And we were, you know, shortlisted for Entrepreneur University of the Year a few years ago. Why we have embedded businesses throughout the faculties that provide, you know, hundreds of hours of work placements. Why we have so many links with industry. It's about, you know, taking students from point A to point Z, and they don't quite know where they're going to end up. And it's not for us to push them into that, but it's for us to give them that spark, which is why the logo is basically a spark, you know, to ignite that passion.
Because Saqib, I wonder how many kids at school are missing out here, because up until comparatively recently, I would say, we treated schools as factories, as to, and you divided people up into different social classes, and that group would be expected to go down the mine, or that group would be expected to go to university, and they weren't treated as individuals. I think it's less like that now, and I think teachers are very conscious that they need to try and work out, well, look, what is this kid best applied to do? But I still think that in many schools there won't be the teachers that can bring that out, that can spot the entrepreneur, that can spot the person who should go into teaching, or should spot the person who, I don't know, should go into radio or whatever. And of course, by the time they get to 2021, they've done a course and then suddenly might realize, actually, I should have done that. How can schools improve effectively talent spotting in this area?
Well, a very interesting question. I think, look, from my perspective, the first thing I'd say, we talk about leveling up. Enterprise is what I would call the great equalizer and the great liberator, really. And we're all here because we believe in that. And I think the largest challenge, in my personal opinion, at the moment is I don't think that message yet permeates through society. So there's still quite a lot of work to be done on that. Of course, schools and teachers will have a role to play in this. And I'm a big fan of enterprise schemes and entrepreneurship programs that permeate. I'd love to see kids at the age of 7, for example, starting to think about what it means to run a business. And I know some schools do that. But there's some of the stuff, as has already been mentioned by Paul, is really comes down to teaching resilience, actually, because with programs like Dragon's Den, what you have had is the idea that actually you can take an idea. You don't even need to invent something new, right? You can take something and you can evolve it, and you might just be better at marketing it, or you may just understand the opportunity, and you can take it to market. So there are things that schools can do which can start to educate children about the opportunities that are available if you have an idea or you have a product. But I also think the ecosystem has a really important role to get society to understand actually that entrepreneurialism actually is a great way for people to have a stake in their community, and for communities to have a stake in their individuals, but also at the same time build up resilience and stamina. And some of the best enterprise hubs, certainly I experienced when I was president of the Chamber of Commerce in the West Midlands, were those that spent time not looking at the idea, but looking at the individual and building up the stamina. And I think that's really where the training comes in. So it's not whether you can teach people, I think it's about training. And actually I find that when people have those ideas, certainly I'm one of those people where I have an idea, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, and it's really annoying for my wife because I'll be doing all sorts of research. But when they have those ideas, the passion will come, but it's the teaching them to actually be resilient enough to deal with the challenges, to deal with failure, which I would say that's something that society certainly needs to nurture.
Justine, let's move the discussion on to finance, because I think one of the biggest barriers to entrepreneurs in this country is the lack of accessibility to finance. Now, Dragon's Den, I suppose, is a good example of showing, well, you can get finance if you can convince a so-called business angel, but there won't be. I mean, how do you find out who these people are? If you're just starting up a normal business, sure, you can get money from family and friends, possibly. But for people who don't come from a business background, but just have a really good idea, I think that's the biggest barrier, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think there's 3 bits in a sense that we've been talking about. One is attitudes and aspiration, like, do I want to do this? Is it something I even thought about? The second is knowledge and skills. Can I do it? And that's a lot where Solent comes in. But I think the third is resources, and there's no getting away from that. And part of why I think leveling up in entrepreneurship matters is because at the moment, and traditionally, it often is whether you know that person in your family or extended family who can just put that little bit of money you need to get started. That's what Dragon's Den is all about. And I love Dragon's Den because I think it just makes you excited about starting a business. But I think beyond that, then it's not just starting the business, it's growing it. And I think you're right, Ian, that even if you can get your business off the ground and you're doing okay, often people then think, well, is that enough? And if I want to go further, is there anyone pushing them to think about expanding? And but how would I do that? And all of the angel investors, all these terminologies for people is just incredibly confusing, I think. And so there probably is a need to somehow help people navigate their way through the journey on entrepreneurship that they go, because at the moment, a lot of the focus is just on the first step, which is I've started a business. For what it's worth, I would say another problem we've got that we need to fix, but probably we can quite easily, is data. We don't really know who's setting up businesses. We know where they're setting up businesses, but actually, I think in government, probably some ability to do more tracking through Companies House of what kind of people are doing it and find out about those different journeys is probably, if you can get that kind of information, it's probably helpful.
And Caroline, I'll come to you in a second here. How much of your courses are based on access to finance, and how you can persuade? I mean, I hesitate to say a bank, because I just think, I mean, banks are so hopeless in this area at the moment, with one or two notable exceptions, one or two who we've spoken to in these seminars. How much of that how much time does that take up in your courses?
Yeah, I mean, it's a critical part of not just our courses, but also, as I mentioned before, we've got the Solent Futures. So they provide seed funding because we do work within the local community. When universities work within the local community and work with businesses, government do give them credit for that, which is a positive. And so they will provide funding support for the support that we've provided, and then we can feed that back into things like, you know, grants and support and the entrepreneur and the innovation hubs that we develop, and so universities, through government, through businesses working together, we can form a virtuous circle, which is actually very positive when it works. And this is a good example. And we've had success through the Small Business Leaders Programme and through the Help to Grow Management Programme, which the government is funding at the moment, which is aimed at businesses with 5 to 249 employees, which is a little bit bigger than micro businesses. I mean, actually about 95% of our small medium enterprises are actually 10 employees or fewer, and 99% are sort of under 249 employees in total. So the vast majority of businesses are actually micro and small medium enterprises, and they account for, as Theo said, they account for half, sort of 50% of the sort of revenue of private enterprises. So it's a really big deal. And if they're not financed properly, they can't get off the ground, and or they fail. As Theo said, they fail in the first 2 years. 50%. Certainly, within 10 years, only a third of businesses that set out are still going. So it's critical that we help businesses in the first year and in the first 2 years, that we get them to 10 years and that we get them beyond 10 years if we can. And that funding is difficult. And we've done some research and we found that it's even more difficult for female and for groups outside sort of white British groups, the minority ethnic groups that are leading 6% of small medium enterprises. They actually have tougher times to get funding. So it shows that funding is biased as well, and difficult to come by. So we do need to look at that. We provide some seed funding. We've got a fantastic Dragon's Den business competition that Theo is actually going to be judging for us. And we're encouraging our alumni and businesses and students who've got business ideas to pitch for £10,000. But there are lots of funding opportunities. And we bring some of those together through things like Business South in the Central South area, and through Venture Fest South. We have these sort of ways to do that, and through the LEP and through the Chambers of Commerce. But as you say, a guide to that, the Federation of Small Businesses and the Institute of Directors, we all try and get together around this because there's a lot going on.
Theo, I can see you're gagging to get in on this. Look, you've got so much experience of sort of starting businesses, raising capital, dealing with people who are pitching to you. I mean, let's start with the raising capital. I mean, what would your advice be to somebody who's got an idea that can't get access to programs like Dragon's Den? Where do they go? They can't. Their bank says, "Well, we need security." Well, we haven't got any security. We like your idea, but we're not willing to take any risk at all. What do people do?
It is still so difficult.
Yeah.
There's so many well-meaning organizations out there that try and do what they can do with incredibly small resources. This needs to be, if we really believe in leveling up, this whole funding issue and education of entrepreneurs and business has to be placed way up the priority list from where it is at the moment. As you can imagine, I'm a great supporter of free enterprise, and I'm not too much into the government intervention on everything. I think the role of government is to create the environment that allows business to grow. But there's levels, there's sections of it that the government not just has to set the environment, but needs to stimulate.
Yeah.
And by stimulate, I mean put their bum in the bacon slicer. Absolutely get involved.
Just imagining that.
Don't go there. Just get actually involved. You know, what was amazing in COVID is the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, within a few weeks, got his big blunderbuss from the top of the fireplace at number 11, filled it with £50 notes, and fired it into the economy. Every business that had a bank account could, within 48 hours, get access to 50 grand. Most of it, sadly, was wasted and will never recover. But if we haven't learned anything from that, is the fact that we can actually set up schemes where we can make small amount of funding available through business hubs. And there's so many of them, by the way. I'm not suggesting that he gets his blunderbuss out again, because he's probably right out of money at the moment. But, you know, but there's hubs that we can send money via and funnel money in an organized way. And the comment that Justin made earlier, the data from that and information we will gather and to allow us to be even better. So every year we will undoubtedly be able to improve. But that's where there has to be not just create an environment, but some direct involvement, less words, a little bit more action.
What about the banking situation where you have got one or two banks now, some of the challenger banks, actually specializing in offering money to startups or to help a business grow? I've got a 30% stake in a forestry machinery company. And I mean, honestly, it started about 3 years ago. It's built up a turnover of about £2.5 million. It's got 3 employees, and it all started with my £30,000 investment. But that business could grow exponentially now. It needs new investment through either borrowing or share ownership. And at the moment, no bank will touch it, even though the balance sheet is great. They can't believe that we've done it with 3 people working for the company. They reckon it should have been about 15. So they don't believe the figures, even though they're all audited and all the rest of it. And you think, well, there ought to be an easier way of doing this. But sometimes you just have to keep bashing down the doors, don't you, Theo?
And you do have to keep bashing down doors. And life doesn't come easy. We all know that. We can't just hand everything to everybody. It just doesn't work like that. But there has to be a way of supporting. If we're going to do it through the banks, we can still do it through the banks. But the annoying thing is when government puts schemes through a bank, it says, dear bank, we will guarantee you to lend money in these areas and criteria. That's wonderful. So the risk of the bank is taken away. But then they put a caveat and say, but only if you were prepared to lend it in the first place. Well, if I was prepared to lend it in the first place, Mr. Government, right? I wouldn't need you. So you've got to make it that little bit easier and that little bit riskier to make it work. And yes, of course, you're going to have some losses. By the way, nowhere near the losses we're going to have to suffer from the £50,000 bounce back loans. But yes, you will have some losses. But the growth in the economy and the money into the economy, I think you'll get dividends.
Saqib, you're a fairly new MP, but you're likely to be promoted to be a minister. I'm giving you that encouragement right now. If you were promoted to be a business minister, say in the next reshuffle, Michael Heseltine always says, if you're a junior minister, pick one thing that you think you can achieve, because that is probably all you will achieve while you're in that department, maybe for 18 months, 2 years. Lynn Featherstone did that on equal marriage when she became a Home Office minister, most famously. Listening to this conversation, is there one thing that you could identify that if you became a business minister, you would try and change in the system to help young entrepreneurs?
Well, first of all, thank you for your endorsement. I often call those endorsements career killers, so thank you for that.
Especially from me.
Look, in that hypothetical situation, I think one thing Theo's talking about is quite important. I've always found, certainly in my professional career, I launched the Midlands Engine Investment Fund. So you had VC firms coming together with the British Business Bank, and there were two things actually. The British Business Bank took. It was incredibly challenging trying to get that funding unlocked, first of all. But I found that the availability of funding was actually, there was loads of money around, right? Loads of money sloshing around the system. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, oh, there's loads of money around. But for businesses to try and access that, unless you've got good advisors and good supporters, so for example, Rishi last year, the Chancellor launched the Help to Grow scheme, and you had vouchers to help people. Now, I think that's the right idea. I think it helps handhold businesses through that process. Ideally, I'd love for just that area to be more deregulated, so for businesses to be able to access the funding much more easily. Now, Theo quite rightly pointed out that we had the bounce back loan scheme over COVID. The trade-off with that, of course, was there was less traceability of where that money went. But of course, you have to then make that judgment. But the reason the bounce back loan scheme came about was because the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, the CBILS, the way that was structured was because banks were not taking the risk, and they weren't willing to make the whole system was just getting completely clogged up. So I stood up in Parliament and I made the case, actually saying, we need to find a new way of doing that, and the Chancellor listened. So there's always that trade-off. But for me, there's probably two things I'd say actually. If it was Bayes, I'd say certainly trying to make sure that we have greater deregulation, so allowing for investors to be able to much more freely invest in businesses. But also just coming back to the education point. I remember my first ever local enterprise partnership meeting. We were talking about construction, and one of the FE colleges that was there was talking about the lag between what businesses need and what they can deliver, and trying to challenge that and trying to reduce that time. It was quite key to make sure that that educational institutions were meeting the demand in the system. And I think that's only got more and more acute, really. But one thing I always heard, whether you were Jaguar Land Rover, which is in my patch, or Gymshark, they needed skilled staff who understood things like coding, who understood things like graphic design, skilled staff who may one day then go off and create their own businesses and create more jobs and create more wealth for society. So I think there's two overarching aims that I would probably try and pursue, and even if I was able to achieve half of those, I'd be quite proud.
Paul, from your point of view, where do you think the missing link is in the whole system of financing entrepreneurs?
It's difficult. Funny enough, thinking about Dragon's Den, you've got to have a very good idea, well formed, well explained, costed, and so on and so forth. And I think you know, as the world has changed over the last couple of years, I think the idea of risk has become even more prevalent, that people are less certain about what's coming next. But the best thing we can do is, and you know, as part of our pitching process and part of our courses, is to teach students how to put those packages together as best they can and teach them skills in pitching. So at least they've got a fighting chance of being able to explain their idea and their product when it comes to financing as best we can. And then after that, it's about market forces and what the banks, you know, thinking is at that time, and what their risk, you know, appetite is like. We can only take, you know, that horse to water, so to speak.
But that's a really important thing. And Theo, you've got so much experience of this, where people pitch to you, and some of them, you watch them and you think, well, they are showmen or show women. They can market themselves, and often it is themselves rather than necessarily their idea, isn't it? But then there are some people who've got fantastic ideas. They've done a brilliant business plan, but they can't sell for toffee.
Well, that's the world round. But what we all have learned on Dragon's Den, as Dragons, is it's not always about the idea. Certainly, my first year, everything I invested in was all about the idea, what idea I liked, and then realized that someone with a good idea but really is not the right person, or very average, is not can't apply themselves, it will never succeed anyway. So for me and many of the other Dragons, it became about the people. Can they deliver? That's the $6 million question. And some of those pitches that you would see in those days on TV for 3 or 4, 5 or 10 minutes might go on for hours. So they do get over the nerves of having to sell themselves. We did give them every chance. And many times for the first 10 minutes, I thought, not for me. And then as the hours went on, you find you get engaged, they get engaged, they relax, they explain themselves better. And you can think, you know what, I can do business with her, I can do business with him. And you're in, because you really feel they can deliver. And it's about them understanding their business. And how many times have I heard someone say, oh, where do the BBC get all these people that come on and they don't even know their numbers? Well, I often reply, welcome to the great British world of small business, right? And that's why half of them fail. And that's the overriding thing that Dragon's Den has done, is explain to people that you do need to understand your numbers. You do need to do your homework. You can't just get up one morning and say, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to be a Del Boy, I'm going to duck and I'm going to dive and see how much money is left at the end of the day. You have to have structure. And that's the biggest lesson.
Paul, let's move the subject on a little bit to the relationship between educational institutions, whether it's schools or universities, and business, because I suspect there's a lot of improvement. I mean, obviously, from what you and Carol have already said, you do a fantastic job on this, but around the country, particularly in the areas that need levelling up, I wonder if those relationships exist to the extent that they ought to. How can they be encouraged?
I think it's to a great extent, it's about dialogue, and it's about not separating education and business as being two completely opposite interests. And, you know, Theo, for example, being the Chancellor of Solent University is a great example of that, is that we see that industry has so much to give, and so do we. And in a partnership, by keeping that dialogue going, exactly as you said earlier, really, every time I used to have media students, and I would say to the big companies, what do you want us to teach the students? And it was nothing to do with theory. It was always to do with transferable skills and resilience and timekeeping and so on and so forth, even at quite a basic level. But as time's gone on, and particularly in business, there's so much more that a university can offer in terms of research and development and knowledge exchange. And then using the student body in that relationship allows real experience to be gained by those students. It's about that practical application. And there's nothing like it. All courses are, to a degree, a mixture of theory and practice and a little bit of training. But it's for 10,000 hours of experience. And we try to get that, to give that to students through exposure to guest speakers coming in, through live briefs, for having these companies like Solent Productions, Solent creators, where we're putting them in touch with clients and delivering a product to a client and so on and so forth, in addition to a curriculum. So it's about nurturing all of those skills in tandem together. So by the time they graduate, they've got a CV that is just full of evidence, not just examination passes and grades. So when an employer says, well, how do I know you won't drop it and break it? You can say, well, I've done it 10 times already, and these are the results I had. And these are the mistakes I've made. And these are the new mistakes that I'll make in future, I'm sure. But it gives the employer that sense of partnership, rather than, here is education and it's all theory and it's in an ivory tower and over here's the real world. Bridging that gap is absolutely key.
Let's talk to the former politician and the current politician about this as well, because Justine, in your old constituency, I'm sure you had occasions when you visited schools and maybe you were thinking, well, why aren't they liaising with local businesses more? Why aren't they getting business people in to talk to their peers? I don't know whether it's okay, whether you have that as well, but Justine first.
So I think it's always a problem finding the time for schools to do this, what they see as other stuff. The irony, of course, is it's not other stuff. It's actually right at the core of what the purpose of education, in a sense, is all about. It's about that preparation for what you're going to go on and hopefully be able to do in your future life. My experience for my local community was our relationships with schools were actually pretty good. Putney doesn't have a lot of very big businesses in it. It's a classic London suburb with a plethora of small businesses, and actually a lot of them SMEs that were set up by local people. So it's probably one of those places that's quite a good example of an entrepreneurial place. And I think you get that sort of spirit, but it's not representative of a wider country. And the place where I grew up, by contrast, in Rotherham, I never even met anyone who ran a company, let alone somebody who had set up one. And yet, as I've told you before, Ian, it was one of the first things I wanted to do. There were two things I wanted to do as a small kid. I wanted to be the first in my family to get to university, and I wanted to set up a company because we didn't have any jobs in Rotherham. And I thought companies create jobs. So if I could do a company that was successful, that created jobs, that would be a good thing for my community. And so I just saw it from a very different perspective. Yes, I wanted to make lots of money because that's what I saw business people doing on TV. We didn't have Dragon's Den, but we did have Dallas and Dynasty and all sorts of other things that made business.
Oh, that's it.
Cool. That's how old I am.
You wanted to be Sue Ellen Ewing, didn't you?
No, I was more probably in the sort of owning that oil company, not the wife of the man who owned the oil company. But I just so I think there's a long way to go for schools to work out how to fit in entrepreneurship. But fundamentally, what we're learning from this session is it's all about skills. And the skills that make a brilliant entrepreneur are the skills that enable you to be successful in life, full stop. So if we can have that as a bigger part of our education system, then it's a win-win all round.
Saqib, this relationship between schools and business.
I think it needs to be massively better. I mean, in my constituency, if you travel from the south to the north of my constituency, it's about a 10-mile gap, and it's an 8-year gap in life expectancy. And ultimately, for me, it is so important that schools aren't, as I think you used the phrase, a factory line of creating just people going out into the workforce. Nothing wrong with that, of course, if that's what people want to do, but allowing them to have the choice. And incredibly talented young people and individuals, socially conscious people in my constituency in the north. But they often complain about not having the opportunities. So one of the things I've done, I had a careers fair, which, you know, I had to delay over COVID about 6 times. We did a careers fair about 2 months ago, and the reason I did it, I had great careers advice. When I was at school, I was so lucky to have that. I remember Mrs. Billingham, who is no longer with us, God rest her soul. She sat with me for a whole day as I, you know, one of those annoying kids who said about 10 different careers that weren't connected to each other. So she, you know, she took the time to talk to me and do that, and that always stuck with me because I had an adult who sat with me, talked me through different things. So whenever I speak to a company, large or small, I would always say, oh, by the way, I'm doing a careers fair. We'd love to have you there. And we had about 400 people sign up. We had, you know, Google there, Barclays there, West Midlands Combined Authority, the police, and I just wanted, and I didn't put it, you know, I didn't put it in a place where I thought, oh great, this will be really convenient for me to get to. I put it in a place where actually in the north, where in a college where there would be a kind of a nucleus of students, a nucleus of people who will be looking for that kind of career change and that career opportunity. And I had the universities there as well. So those are the roles I think we can play as politicians, working with business and trying to be that bridge between them.
I do wonder.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great initiative, and I know lots of other MPs do these, but I wonder, is it really the role of a Member of Parliament to put on a careers fair? Surely that should be for local businesses or the local council to organise. That's not part of your job description, is it?
Well, to be honest, the way I view it is if I see that there was something that needed doing, and I've got that experience and knowledge, and, you know, I speak to businesses, I actually disagree. I think we should do it. By the way, I linked up with the council, and, you know, if it meant that I set that standard, you know, weirdly, it turned out that Birmingham Airport, which is also in my constituency, was also doing a careers fair. And that's an example of a business basically deciding that they wanted to do that. So I think you can't have enough of these initiatives. But I also recognise that I needed to do so because schools and businesses needed someone to help bridge that gap. Of course, look, I'd love for businesses just to take the initiative and do that. But if, as a Member of Parliament, I recognise that there's a gap. That's what I try to build.
Normally at this point in all of these seminars, I ask Justine to sum up and take some conclusions. But today I'm going to ask Theo to do it because I think we've all really enjoyed his contribution to this discussion. What do you take from what we've been talking about, Theo, and how do you think it can be translated into action to help us level up those areas that need to in terms of entrepreneurship?
I mean, what I love about this conversation, and many, many, many more I've had, is that we all agree, which should make it really, really, really easy to do something about it. But as I mentioned earlier, it's just not high enough up on the agenda for governments, local authorities. And if we've got to do one thing, it's our job to push it up the agenda, because only then will we start seeing the joined up action that needs to be taken between all the stakeholders, of which government has to be one of those. But so is education, and so is society in general. And if we can push it up the agenda and find those champions like Saqib and others, and Justin and other people who have influence and can actually see not just the leveling up and the social mobility that it creates, but the financial benefits it gives to the economy, then I think we'll crack it.
Well, it's been a really interesting hour. The one thing I've learned is that it is possible for a West Ham supporter to like, admire and respect a Millwall supporter. And I hope it goes the other way, Theo.
Well, absolutely. And at the moment, this is your purple patch period. So please enjoy. They don't come very often.
Believe me, I am. Listen, thank you all very much indeed. Paul Marchbank, Caroline Walsh, the future Secretary of State for Business, Enterprise and whatever, Saqib Bhatti and Justine Greening. Good to have you all involved. If you've missed any of our seminars in the past, you can find them on the Fit for Purpose and Levelling Up Goals websites. Do have a look. They're all really, really interesting. And join us again next time. Goodbye.